So we're talking about Aaron Rodgers and kind of what's going on with his relationship with the Packers, and we know that it is a marriage that's dissolving right before our eyes. Well, while that divorce is happening, there's another marriage that's potentially in the works. So 2 days ago, the Pac-12 and the Big 12 met and had a call to discuss a potential marriage. Now, how this relationship will shake out, we don't really know. It could potentially just be a merger, or it could be a scheduling thing where, one Big 12 school will schedule another Pac-12 school as one of their non-conference games each year for however many years. We don't know how that's going to go down. But Pac-12 Commissioner George Kliavkoff, I think I butchered that properly.
That's okay.
But he stated that he was in no hurry to add teams, but he also said that the conference is answering the phone. His actual quote is, "I've got lots and lots of calls from probably every school you would imagine, and probably a few you'd be surprised by. We're listening to all inbound inquiries because it seems like the smart thing to do." And he's not wrong there. But he would go on to say, "I think over time the dominoes will start falling as a result of the move by Texas and Oklahoma. And we are not determined, and we haven't determined, to expand in order to thrive. We can thrive at 12. We don't understand that if someone else has 16, you need to have 16. It just doesn't make sense." And that is where he is incorrect. Because it's not just the numbers. It's the quality of the numbers.
That's right.
He's thinking quantity, not quality.
Yep.
Or quality, not quantity. However, the SEC is over here saying we want quantity and quality.
Well, and that's the whole thing. That's the difference. If the SEC would have added, Shrizzle Dizzle over here, we'll get Screwman University over here, nobody would care. I was like, they're just adding 2 more universities. Nobody really cares. So what? They got 16 teams. Who cares? What's the big deal? But we're talking Texas and Oklahoma,
which are huge, huge power brands.
That's right. So now it is a big deal. That's what he's not getting. I mean, you can add schools to your conference and get up to 16, but who are you bringing in?
Well,
and do they matter?
He's not even saying that he wants to get to 16.
I'm simply saying that this is what he's not understanding about from 12 to 16, that if someone else has 16, you need to have 16. You don't just put 16 in there to have 16. They're putting 16 in there because the schools add to their conference. That's why you do it. Only if it enhances your conference. So if you're going to go to 16 teams, or like the SEC, adding teams to it, they're doing that because it adds to the SEC. It adds to the brand. It adds to the income that those brands are going to bring to your conference.
Especially with the new TV deals.
Yeah, of course.
And
so that's why you do that.
But for the Pac-12, you got to understand, if you stay at 12, you do run the risk of getting left behind, because you are once the Big 12 folds, as we both expect it to eventually, the Pac-12 will be the smallest power conference left.
Yes.
Because the Big 10 has 14. I believe the ACC has 14. The SEC will now have 16, and the Pac-12 just having the 12. The Pac-12 will, stay falling farther and farther and farther behind.
Yep.
Going into the last 2 seasons, common, perception across the country has been that the Pac-12 was already one of the weaker conferences anyway. They play later in the day, so they get less eyeballs on them throughout the day. Plus, if you have fewer teams, that's even less teams for people to try to watch. They need to do something, or else old Georgie boy here might be on the outside looking in by the time all this realignment's said and done.
Yeah, they need to be careful about that. You can't just rest on your laurels right now, because you see what's happening. You can't just sit there and pretend that it's not and go, well, we're just going to kind of put our feelers out and see what's going on. And I'm not saying you jump into a marriage with somebody else. I'm definitely not saying that, especially if you're just looking at somebody else's leftovers. And that's what you're talking about right here.
Yeah, I mean,
these are the leftovers.
There's
from the powerhouses who decide to get out of the Big 12.
There's no brands to really bring into the Pac-12 outside of maybe Oklahoma State. I mean, that's one that would make sense to bring in. I know people want to talk about Kansas to the Big Ten, but Kansas is god-awful at football.
Yes.
And they're blue blood at basketball.
Oh, yeah,
and basketball is the second highest revenue maker.
Yep.
But basketball doesn't make near the revenue that football does.
No.
It just doesn't. So, I mean, can you really? I mean, does the Big Ten really want to add Kansas? Iowa State, they're up in football right now. Traditionally, they've been really bad at it. Not really been good at much of anything else either. Once Matt Campbell leaves Iowa State, they're going to go back to being bad again. I don't
That's
think
right.
the Big Ten wants to be stuck with that brand.
No, they don't.
People keep wanting to talk about West Virginia to the ACC because logistically it makes sense. Logistically, geographically, that move makes sense. The problem is West Virginia does not make money as a school. They have decent teams across a litany of sports. However, they just don't seem to draw in cash. In the ACC, if they want to take in teams, they want to expand. West Virginia is not their number one priority. Their number one priority, without question, is Notre Dame. They'll take Notre Dame and someone else. Or they'll take just Notre Dame, but they're not going to take just West Virginia.
No, that's very, very true. Very, very true.
And the weird thing now is, they brought up that proposal for the college football playoff expansion,
Yes.
going from 4 to 12 teams. However, it's just that. It's just a proposal. And now with the SEC and Greg Sankey pulling off the largest coup that we've seen in our lifetimes, adding Texas and Oklahoma over to that brand, all these other athletic or commissioners of these conferences, whether it's the ACC, the Big Ten, Pac12, Big 12, whatever, they can all squash the playoff expansion. All they have to do is say, no, we don't want to do that, because then the SEC is going to have 5 or 6 teams in there, and we're just not going to let that happen.
SEC is still going to have 2 teams in there. It's still going to have 2 teams in there.
I guess that because the conferences, they get bonus revenue based on, having a school in the playoff. But if you've got the 14 playoff, if the SEC has 2, the SEC as a conference is making twice as much money.
Yeah, so if you're just scared, say you're scared. Call it what you will.
But here's the thing. Well, think about it this way, too. You get into a 12-team playoff, and let's say there's 6 SEC schools in the playoff, and 1 team from 6 other conferences.
Sure.
That makes up your field. Well, now the SEC is making 6 times the money as these other conferences. So they are trying to do what they can to keep the field of college football as level as possible.
Have better teams. I don't know what else to tell you. I mean, you're still going to have 2 SEC teams if it's in a field of 4. And that's going to leave other schools out, period, anyway. In
Well,
other conferences.
depending.
Just
it could be 4.
depending. Mostly, yes. You're gonna if we're staying at 4, you're probably going to have 2 SEC teams in there. Look at the history of it. I think that's going to hold out, especially now Texas and Oklahoma are in there. LSU.
Well, they're not there
Georgia,
yet.
Bama.
Pump the brakes.
Yeah, but I'm saying it's happening.
2025. That is the company line that they are towing.
They're not making 2025. Don't even.
Well, they won't make 2025 because the
bet
Big 12 won't make it to 2025.
No, that's what I'm saying.
However,
it won't be 2025
until that happens, that is the line that they have to toe. Now, most people think Texas and Oklahoma will be in the SEC next year. I think most people think it'll probably be 2023,
that's what
though.
I kind of think. It'd be nice if it was next year, but I think it's going to be 2023.
And that's going to be a whole thing too. Is does it really matter if these 2 schools join if they just get beat up by the other SEC programs?
I don't think that's going to happen either.
I think it'll happen for Texas more so than Oklahoma.
I think so too. I think Oklahoma's right now more situated to handle it. But again, you still look at the teams in the SEC, and I'm going, okay, well, I know Texas is better than a lot of these teams in there. They're not better than the Alabamas and the LSUs.
Or the Georgias or the Floridas.
Georgia, probably not Florida. But I think with everybody else, they can hold their own on.
They're not better than A&M right now.
I don't think they are either.
They're not better than Oklahoma right now.
As painful as that is for me to say.
So that's at best. Texas is the 7th best team as we're just talking about stuff right now in this moment.
But 7th best out of 16. They're not bottom feeding either, though. So I think there's still a lot of hope, and they've had some pretty good.
This is also a Texas team that you got to remember has struggled recently. Over the last 2 years, has struggled with Kansas.
Yep.
God awful Kansas.
That's right.
They've struggled with them. They struggled with Kansas State year in. I say that, but Oklahoma's lost to Kansas State the last 2 years, so there's that.
Yeah, well, Steve Sarkisian in there now, though.
Yeah, and I think if there's a coach that can help Texas make that turn, who can actually start developing the talent, because Texas has always recruited well. SEC, just joining the SEC is not going to help Texas in recruiting. They've always killed that. The problem is player development.
And Steve Sarkisian knows SEC style football.
Right, because he's coming out of Alabama, but he's also got to deal with a bunch of guys who are from that same Nick Saban coaching tree. You know, Kirby Smart over there at Georgia was the defensive coordinator for Alabama.
Yep.
Lane Kiffin, the head coach at Ole Miss, was the offensive coordinator at Alabama directly before Steve Sarkisian. And we've seen Steve Sarkisian as a head coach at USC, and that did not go well.
No.
However, we saw Lane Kiffin as the head coach at USC, and that didn't go well either, and he seems to be doing all right, at the University of Mississippi.
So a lot of times it just depends. I mean, and that's my point, though. Who knows? We don't know what we're going to see.
I mean,
I do know this. Regardless of Oklahoma and Texas, you're still going to see two teams out of the SEC in the playoffs probably every year. I mean, because those top four teams out of there are really good.
It depends on who the conference champions are and what the record is. Now, if you've got Ohio State undefeated coming out of the Big Ten, you got Clemson undefeated coming out of the ACC, you got Alabama undefeated coming out of the SEC. Well, if you got Oregon or USC that's undefeated coming out of the Pac-12, they're going to go in as an undefeated conference champion over, one loss Florida or one loss Georgia.
I think if they go in as one loss team and just losing the conference championship,
a conference champion would have to have one loss for another SEC team to get in, and we've seen it. I mean, it happens.
Well, it happens a lot. So that's what I'm saying. I still think there's going to be two SEC teams there because I'd rather take a one-loss SEC team who just lost in the conference championship game over a conference champion of most of these other conferences. They're just that good. So which tells you the power. Going back to it, and the whole point is that's the power of the SEC.
And now it's gotten more powerful with the addition of Texas and Oklahoma.
That's right.
So, but going back to the Big 12, Pac-12 relationship here that could potentially be brewing, what happens if these two conferences decide to do a full tilt merger?
Nothing.
There's 8 teams left. Well, no, listen.
Nothing.
The Pac-12 then expands to 20 teams.
All right.
Now they are making a killing in revenue because you got all these schools in there.
Sure.
However, you got to split that profit several more ways, and you pick up a blue blood in basketball in Kansas.
Yeah.
Although their football's down, but you pick up a good football, basketball, baseball school in Oklahoma State.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think they would pick up all 8 Big 12 schools that are remaining just because the Pac-12 seems to not have they don't like religious private schools. Although most people say that they should pick up BYU, but BYU is another one of those private religious schools. So who knows how that could shape out. However, I think it's a very intriguing possibility. And if they were to expand to 20 teams before the other conferences, what do the other conferences do? Do they say, hey, we're cool where we are? Or did they start trying to grab some of these top-end group of 5 schools to add in? I think it would be super interesting to see Memphis in the SEC.
Oh,
they're located in the heart of SEC country anyway. It's a major city. It's the biggest city in the state of Tennessee. It's bigger than Knoxville. It's bigger than Nashville for you Tennessee and Vanderbilt fans out there. But to see Memphis actually in the SEC trying to recruit against these other schools, that could be really interesting. They're a small school, though, and they would definitely struggle early and probably struggle for a while.
Yep. I don't care what the Pac-12 does. They can add 74 other teams. I'm not impressed. Lesser power teams and teams with that huge brand recognition.